Dara Sims was 34 years old the morning a man she had never seen before walked into the back of her wedding reception and changed the course of everything she thought she had built. She had been giving him $20 every weekday morning for 3 years and 4 months. She had not known his name. She had not known until the moment he stood in the doorway of the banquet hall at the Marriott on 4th Avenue in Louisville with a pressed shirt and a manila envelope that he had known hers. To the people in the reception room, the 200 guests who had eaten and danced and raised their glasses to her marriage to a man named Conrad Page, she was the bride. Quietly radiant, her mother had said at the ceremony. The kind of woman who made everything look easy, which was not a compliment she had ever known what to do with. Because nothing she had built had been easy, and what looked effortless was the result of years of work she had never discussed in rooms that didn't require her to. Conrad Page was an architect. He was handsome and credentialed, and spoke about design in a way that made ordinary people feel elevated by the conversation. He had proposed in the spring with a ring he had selected himself, which she had appreciated, and she had said yes in a garden in the early evening light and believed, with a kind of belief that has not yet been tested, that she was about to spend her life with a man who saw her clearly. What she did not know on her wedding day, what the man in the pressed shirt with the manila envelope was about to show her, was that Conrad Page had been living two lives with the specificity and organization of a man who had been doing it for years. He had a woman in Cincinnati. He had a child in Cincinnati. He had an apartment in Cincinnati that he paid for under a name that was not his primary professional name, with $4,200 going out monthly from an account Dara had never seen. The homeless man's name was Walter Briggs. He was not homeless. He had not been homeless in 11 years. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. She had found him the first morning by accident. She parked her car 3 blocks from her office at the civil engineering firm on Market Street because the garage closer in was expensive and she was 30 years old and managing her money with the deliberateness her grandfather had modeled his entire life. He had been a civil engineer too, the kind who worked on public infrastructure, bridges, drainage systems, the invisible architecture that kept the city from flooding. And he had told her when she entered the field that the work that mattered most was always the work that went unnoticed when it was working and only got attention when it failed. She had found this to be true in her career and in most other areas of her life. The man had been sitting on the steps outside a boarded building on the corner of 3rd and Market with a cup of coffee in a foam cup and nothing else visible. She had stopped because something in his posture did not read as defeated. He sat upright, which was not what she expected, and he was looking at the street with the expression of a person who was watching rather than waiting, and she had stood there for a moment before she reached into her wallet and held out a 20. He had looked at her then and said, "I appreciate that, and I don't need it, but I'll take it." She had laughed, which surprised her, and kept walking. She had come back the next morning because she was a methodical woman, and she was curious, and she had a route she walked every day, and he had become part of it. He was there most mornings. On the mornings he was not, she kept the 20 in her coat pocket and gave it the next day. She did not ask his name. He did not offer it. They had developed, over months and then years, a quiet ritual of exchange that was not quite friendship and not quite charity, and was something she did not have a word for but found necessary in the way she found her morning tea necessary, and the walk necessary, and the 20 minutes of quiet before the office necessary. He asked good questions. She had not expected that. In the way that conversations accumulate over 3 years of daily contact, even brief ones, she had told him things. Not everything. She was not a woman who told everything to anyone. But she had told him about the bridge project she was working on and her grandfather's philosophy about invisible work and the man she was seeing named Conrad and the way the relationship had developed and the proposal and the planning. He had listened. He had not offered opinions she didn't ask for. When she mentioned Conrad, he had asked one question each time: how does he treat the people who can't do anything for him? She had answered each time, and each time filed something away without quite examining it. Her grandfather's toolbox was in the studio at the back of her house, a Victorian on a quiet street in the Highlands neighborhood that she had purchased the year she made project lead and restored over 2 years with contractors she managed herself and one wall in the kitchen she had retiled on her own over a weekend with a borrowed tile saw and the same patience her grandfather had brought to load calculations. The toolbox was steel and heavy and smelled of the particular oil he had used on his equipment for 40 years. She had kept every tool in it. She used them. She had met Conrad Page at a professional conference in Indianapolis in 2021. He was giving a panel presentation on adaptive reuse of industrial buildings, and he was good at it, fluent and precise and generous with ideas, not possessive of them the way some architects were. She had asked a question from the floor, and he had answered it with full attention and found her afterward and asked if she wanted to continue the conversation over dinner, and she had said yes because the question had genuinely interested him and not just him. They had dated for 8 months before she introduced him to anyone who mattered. She was deliberate about that. Her mother, who lived 30 minutes from Louisville in a house Dara had helped her purchase 5 years ago, had met him at Thanksgiving and said afterward that he was charming and had paused before she said it, which Dara had noticed and set aside. He had moved to Louisville in the spring and taken a position with a firm in the East Market District. He was in the city. He was present. He made dinner on Tuesdays and attended her work events and asked about her projects with apparent interest. She had not found what was wrong because she had not known to look for it in the specific place where it was hidden, and because she had trusted him in the deliberate and considered way she trusted most things, after observation, with evidence, and with the full willingness to be wrong. She had been wrong. She did not know it on the morning of the wedding, a Saturday in September. She dressed in her house in the Highlands with her mother and her cousin Yvette, who had flown in from Philadelphia and who was the kind of company that made even difficult mornings easier. She had eaten breakfast. She always ate before important events because her grandfather had told her that a person who makes decisions on an empty stomach makes the decisions the hunger needs rather than the decisions the situation calls for. She ate eggs and drank her tea and received the morning. The ceremony was at noon. The reception ran from 2 until 9. She had danced with her mother and with her cousin Yvette and with Conrad, who danced with the easy confidence of a man who believed he had arranged things exactly as he intended. Walter Briggs walked into the reception at 4:47 in the afternoon. She saw him from across the room, and her mind took a moment to place him, because he was not in the context in which she had always seen him, and because he was wearing a collared shirt and dark trousers, and was clean and composed in a way that made her understand in one disorienting second that what she had known about him was entirely partial. He was perhaps 60, broad through the shoulders, with the posture she had noticed the first morning, upright, watching rather than waiting. He caught her eye. He held it. She crossed the room because something in the way he held it told her to. He said, "I'm sorry to do this today. I want you to know I considered every other option." He held out the manila envelope. "I've been trying to find the right time for 4 months. There is no right time." She took the envelope. She moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined her. She did not open it in the reception hall. She carried it to an anteroom off the main corridor, a small carpeted space with a coat rack and a mirror, and the sound of the band muffled behind the wall, and she sat on the bench along the wall and opened it. Inside was a photograph. 2 photographs. A series of documents. The photograph showed Conrad on a street she did not recognize, with a woman she did not know, and a child who was perhaps 4 years old. Conrad was laughing. The child was holding his hand. It was not the photograph of a man who was elsewhere with someone who did not matter. The documents were more thorough. She was an engineer. She read them the way she read load calculations, from the beginning, carefully, without skipping steps. A lease agreement in Cincinnati. A bank account registered to Conrad under a middle name he had never used in her presence. Monthly transfers of $4,200. The woman's name was Anisha. The child's name was given in a medical document that had been included. A pediatrician's record with Conrad listed as the father. She sat with the documents for 6 minutes. She knew it was 6 minutes because she looked at her watch when she sat down and looked at it again when she stood up. Her hands didn't shake. She went back into the reception. She found her cousin Yvette first, because Yvette was the person she trusted most in a room, and because she needed to tell one person the shape of what she was carrying before she decided what to do with it. She took Yvette to the edge of the room, near the bar, and spoke quietly for 90 seconds. Yvette looked at her. Then she said, "What do you need right now?" Dara thought about it. "I need to find my attorney's number, and I need to eat something." Yvette said, "I'll get you a plate. You find the number." She had an attorney, a woman named Bernadette Cross, who had reviewed the prenuptial agreement Conrad had declined to sign, which was a fact Dara had noted, and which had caused her to quietly ensure, in the weeks before the wedding, that her primary financial assets were structured in ways that did not depend on marital partnership. Bernadette had an after-hours number for her clients. Dara called it from the anteroom while Yvette stood outside the door. Bernadette answered on the 3rd ring. It was a Saturday at 5 in the evening. Dara said, "I'm at my reception. I need you to know that I have evidence of a prior family. I need to understand what today means legally and what my next steps are." Bernadette was silent for one brief moment. Then she said, "Today means you are legally married. It also means you have grounds. We talked Monday morning. Tonight you are in control of what you say and do, and that matters. Don't do anything from anger, and don't do anything that can be used against you later." "I understand," Dara said. "Are you all right?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm clear," she said. "That's close enough." She went back into the reception. She ate the plate Yvette had assembled. She danced once more with her mother, who held her close enough to feel that something had shifted and who asked, quietly, in her ear, whether she needed to go. Dara said not yet. She had a plan, and the plan required finishing the evening without visible fracture. She had been raised to measure twice before she committed to anything. She had the measurement now. Conrad drove them home at 9. She was pleasant in the car. She was pleasant as they came into the house. When he went upstairs, she sat in the kitchen with her tea and her grandfather's toolbox on the floor beside the table, and she sat in the quiet for a long time. She was done. Monday morning arrived after a weekend she had spent at her mother's house, which she had gone to Sunday after telling Conrad she needed one night away, which was not a lie. Her mother had not asked many questions. She had made food Dara didn't ask for and sat with her in the kitchen the way mothers sit with daughters, when they understand that what is needed is not advice but presence. Bernadette's office at 9 on Monday morning was orderly and cool and smelled of the particular neutral calm of a room in which difficult things were managed professionally. Dara laid the envelope on the table and walked through what it contained. Bernadette looked at everything. She asked 4 questions. Then she said, "The prenuptial agreement was declined. That means we're working within marital law. You've been married 72 hours. The question of what you want the outcome to be is the most important question in this room right now." "I want out," Dara said. "Cleanly and completely and without my finances entangled in whatever he has built in Cincinnati." "Your premarital assets are documented?" Bernadette said. 7 years of documentation, Dara said. "Separate accounts, separate property. The house is mine in origin. I have the purchase records. Then we have a workable position," Bernadette said. "This will take time, but it will be clean." Tools were meant to work, not shine. And Dara had always understood which was which. Walter Briggs, she had learned through Yvette, who had spoken with him briefly in the corridor before he left the reception, had worked for 32 years as an investigator for a regional insurance firm before he retired. He lived in the Germantown neighborhood of Louisville and had lost his apartment to a building fire 11 years ago, lived in a shelter for 7 months, and rebuilt from there. He walked to the coffee shop on 3rd and Market every morning because it was 2 blocks from his apartment and he liked the air and the movement. He had recognized Conrad Page in the summer, 4 months before the wedding, had seen him on the street near Dara's office during one of his visits, and recognized him from a case he had worked 12 years ago. A fraud investigation that had not produced a conviction, but had produced enough documentation to tell him everything he needed to know about the man's character and habits. He had kept the information for 4 months while he tried to find a way to deliver it that was not the way he delivered it. There had been no other way. She had gone to 3rd and Market on the Wednesday after the Monday meeting with Bernadette. He was there. She sat on the steps beside him, which she had never done before, and she said, "I want to know who you are." He told her. He told her all of it. The career, the fire, the shelter, the morning walks, the 4 months of sitting with what he knew. He said he had kept taking her $20 every morning for 3 years because stopping would have changed the thing between them, and the thing between them was the only reason she trusted him enough to open the envelope. She thought about that for a long time. "You could have told me sooner," she said. "I could have," he said. "And you would have had to decide whether you believed a man you'd been giving money to every morning about a man you were planning to marry. Before I had the documentation complete." He looked at her evenly. "I needed you to be able to know it was true, not just hear it." She understood that. She was an engineer. She understood the difference between an assertion and a verified load calculation. She thanked him. She gave him the $20 she had in her pocket, which was the last time, and which they both understood to be the last time without either of them saying so. The annulment had been granted on grounds of fraud. The prior undisclosed family met the legal standard in Kentucky without ambiguity. Conrad had not contested the fraud finding, because there was nothing in the documentation to contest. He had returned to Cincinnati. His name appeared in the public record of the proceeding and then receded from her life the way things recede when you stop turning toward them. She had not seen him since the Monday after the wedding. 16 months after the wedding, she was at her drafting table in the studio at the back of the Victorian on a quiet morning in January with her tea. The bridge project she had been lead on for 2 years was entering its final review phase. The documentation was thorough. The calculations were sound. She was satisfied with the work in the specific way she was only satisfied when something was built to hold for the long run. There was a man named Jerome in her life now, a structural engineer she had worked alongside on the bridge project's second phase, who had come into her professional world first and her personal world slowly and without pressure, which was the only way she had ever trusted anything to arrive. He was patient with detail. He made his coffee strong every morning. He had met her mother in October, and her mother had said afterward, without pausing, that he was good people, which was her mother's highest designation and required no elaboration. Walter Briggs had received a letter from her in the spring, not a long one, because she was not a woman who used more words than a thing required. She had thanked him for the 4 months he had sat with something difficult, because he wanted to be certain before he delivered it. She had enclosed something that was large enough to matter. He had written back. 1 paragraph. He said he was glad the documentation had been complete enough to be useful. He said he thought she was going to be all right the first morning she stopped on the corner and held out the 20, because of the way she stood, like a person who expected the world to hold her weight and was generally right about that. She had folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer of her grandfather's toolbox, beside the level he had used for 40 years and the small folded paper on which he had once written, in his precise accountant's hand, the only professional advice she had ever needed: measure twice, commit once, and never let anyone rush you through either step. The bridge was going to hold for 50 years. She had built it to. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.